Well, thank you everybody for coming out to day 2 of Mages Legal. Today we have a panel of actual game developers here. We had the lawyers in yesterday. We'll have some more in tomorrow, but now we're talking with some game developers to kind of get the other side of things. Tomorrow, as I said, we'll have some more people in. We'll be talking about contracts and music rights and right of publicity and inheritance. And yes, it does come up in games more than you might imagine. Before we get started, real quick, again, most of these people are not lawyers, but still, nothing here is legal advice. We don't know you. We don't know what's going on. If you need a lawyer, call a lawyer. I'm available. Anyway, we may be joined by a fourth panelist any minute now, but for the time being, we have, just run down the line here. First up here is Max Noel, French by birth, Canadian by location, and gamer by heart. Max entered the gaming industry in 2012 after spending a few years honing his skills writing software for French Navy things he can't talk about and TV set-top boxes. He moved to Montreal to write back-end systems for Facebook casual games. He switched to AAA in 2014 and is now a network programmer at Ubisoft Montreal, working on Rainbow Six Siege. In his spare time, he plays bass in various video game music projects.
Hi, guys.
Next up is Suzanne Jacquieu. Suzanne is an associate at the IE Law Group, a law firm focused on video games. She has written articles on the legal issues of game development for several online and print publications and has spoken at many industry conferences and online programs. She's a co-founder and board member of the Voxels, a group for women in game development in Chicago. She's an assistant to the board of the Video Game Bar Association, and she is also a volunteer manager for Take This, an organization focused on mental health in the gaming community. And she's also in the process of making a game, which is why she's here.
Yeah.
Catch her tomorrow for the lawyer stuff. And finally, Dr. Chris Hazard is a frequent speaker and keynote speaker with expertise on technology and human behavior spans across many industries. Chris is a founder and CEO of Hazardous Software, a growing serious game studio that makes video games that help analyze strategy-level problems for large organizations. He holds a PhD in computer science from NC State on artificial intelligence for trust and reputation. He has done work in a variety of fields, including network infrastructure and cybersecurity, hypnosis, robotics, psychology, privacy, economics, and logistics. Dr. Hazard is also known for his 2011 game Akron, which won GameSpot's Best Original Game Mechanic Award, and for his research on game design, for which he has given keynote speeches at major conferences. He may or may not be a supervillain. So welcome all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
To start off, let's just go down the line. I gave the brief introduction, but just introduce yourself a little bit more. You know, who you are, what you've been up to, what are you doing currently. Just give us the overview of who you are. Max, go ahead.
All right, I'm going to start. So, hi, I'm Max. I work at Ubisoft Montreal. I make video games. Well, currently I'm making Rainbow Six Siege, which is fun and fantastic. I work on backend systems, online infrastructure. If servers go down, I might be partially to blame. So, hate me all you want. I'm trying to fix stuff.
All right, I guess we can pause now and introduce our final
A new
panelist
challenger
here.
has arrived.
Luke Peterschmidt has been a professional in the gaming industry for the last 20-plus years as a game designer, brand manager, Fortune 500 consultant, paid speaker, and executive. He currently services his clients through his consulting firm, Geek Dynasty, continues to produce geeky product as a co-owner of Fun to 11, and teaches critical game analysis at a STEM university. He's best known for his work on Bakugan and his ability to write bios that are both informative and end in the word pancake. And so we're, as I said, we got the brief introduction, but now if we can just go straight down the line and give a fuller introduction, and go ahead and start over, Max. Take it back away.
Okay. Hi, I'm Max. Nice to meet you guys.
You already know all.
I make video games. I'm currently working on Rainbow Six Siege. And if things go down, if the online systems don't work, it might be my fault. So, hate away.
Hey, I'm Suzanne. When I'm developing games, though, I typically go as by Zed, lawyer by day, hobbyist game developer at night. Over the summer, I teach 6 to 18-year-olds how to develop games in GameMaker and Unity, which is why I started developing my own game. My game is a 2D top-down dungeon crawler where you learn about legal concepts. So you use powers like an injunction ray to freeze enemies like copyright crab. Because most of the time when folks come up to me and they're like, hey, I really need to copyright this patent, and then my head explodes. I'd love to create a free way of giving people the information to ask the right questions. So it'll be out on PC and Mac hopefully within the next year, but to be announced. Also, as Sam said, I'm on the board of Voxels, which is a group in Chicago that we founded to foster women in game development. We get together monthly and talk about what we're working on, talk about job opportunities, different styles and things, and then we also do video productions and different panels with people who come in and speak to us about issues in the gaming industry. We try and be as inclusive as possible and really get people involved.
And you laugh, but people want to copyright their patents way more than you would think.
So much. Please never say that.
And now you know better.
Right. That's the right.
That's it. Ask a lawyer about that, and then let us bill you hourly for it, please.
All right, so
Dr. Hazard.
Yeah. So as Sam mentioned, I run Hazard Software. We mostly do strategy level serious games. Which, for those of you who are familiar with Ender's Game, if you think about the company that made all of the software behind Ender that he was playing, that's the kind of stuff that we mostly do. Although we, like I said, we made the time travel RTS Acheron. And we've got another game that our second title in the Extreme Gameplay Workshop at GDC, which as far as I'm aware, I think we're the only company that's ever made that in there twice. It's called Plosh Time Bomb, and we'll be announcing that at GDC this year in like 4 weeks. So those are the two main public games. We're also working on some cybersecurity games and a bunch of other high-level strategy games.
All right, you pretty much covered everything except I want to retire as a cowboy. So good. and I'm going to have to run to another panel in like 10 minutes because I'm running it. But
Do you know how to ride a horse?
no,
Okay.
got to start somewhere.
All right. So since this is a panel about video games and law, can you briefly go over what before you started getting into, or as you were starting to get into actual making of games, a brief overview of what did you know about the law? Like any sort of training, any stop laughing. Any training, any knowledge, any experiences you had before getting into the gaming industry? We'll
None. I watch TV.
Fair enough.
I had a friend in grad school who's working on the AI of HIPAA law and how do you parse that law and how do you determine whether or not something is compliant. And then just reading a whole bunch of stuff weeks before I started the company.
Oh, what kind of stuff?
All the things about incorporating. We filed for the patent before we incorporated. Did some networking, met with the patent lawyer, things like that. So I did my homework before we announced it publicly.
All right.
I
Go ahead,
was in
Susan.
law school, so I had about 2 years of legal knowledge under my belt, and now I'm an attorney, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp. I'm an attorney that works exclusively in video games, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of what law stuff.
You're right.
I posted on an internet forum where a friend of mine kind of is a lawyer. That's pretty much all I knew.
That's fair.
Oh, and I played Phoenix Wright. That has to count for something, right?
Maybe a little bit.
Oh, I forgot to mention I trademarked a copyright.
Great,
No.
great. Get out.
Perfect.
There's the door.
Can you patent a trademark?
As long as you incorporate it first.
So it's gonna be one of those panels. Okay, I can handle this.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Max, I know one of the things you've been dealing with, because we've been friends for a while, immigration issues. This is not something you typically think of when you're making a game, but you've had to deal with this firsthand. So,
Absolutely.
tell us about that, I guess.
All right, so as most of you may be able to tell from my accent, I'm French, but I currently live in Canada. That's where I moved to. actually work on video games. And as it turns out, to live and work in a country where you weren't born and you're not a citizen of, you need a visa. Canadian work visas are a tricky beast because temporary worker visas, which is what I'm using right now, only allow you to stay on Canadian territory for 3 years. They can, of course, be renewed a couple times. And most importantly, they only allow you to work for one company, which is the one that sent the visa application on your behalf. So, about a year and a half after I moved to Canada, at this point I was working on Facebook casual games at a company called Ludia in Montreal. These guys, by the way, are fantastic. I got a pretty good offer from another company, Amazon, and well, I accepted it because I figured I'd either move to AAA gaming or one of the big four: Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, or Facebook. And I made the extremely stupid mistake of quitting my previous job before all the paperwork was approved. So I had signed the letter of acceptance from Amazon, everything was fine, I had sent the papers to get my new visa, and then, well, 6 months went by and still no news from anything. The process was apparently getting blocked. And since I had quit my previous job, I was still living on my previous visa, but I wasn't legally allowed to start working for my new employer. So 6 months of unemployment later and not being able to get anything moving at Amazon, I was forced. I started looking elsewhere because I was frankly getting bored of not working. That, and I like money.
That's fair.
So that's when I had been at this point contacted by Ubisoft, who were hiring people. I interviewed with them, it went extremely well. They offered me a job, I took it. They were able to get me a visa within 3 weeks, I think, which is extremely good. And I've been working there ever since. So my main advice to you is, if you're ever working in a foreign country under a worker visa program, if you ever want to change jobs, make sure you are legally allowed to do so, and that you are legally allowed to start working immediately for your new company. If that is not the case, do not ever resign until you get your new papers. Otherwise, you will find yourselves unemployed and not allowed to work anywhere for extended periods of time.
Do you know what the holdup was with Amazon? Have you ever figured that out?
It was apparently at the Canadian government level, because I was initially supposed to work for them at their Vancouver offices in British Columbia, and at this point in BC there had been kind of a scandal related to worker visa bizarre exploits where they were immigrating high numbers of people and massive irregularities. So I don't remember the exact name of the procedure. I think it was the job market opinion or something. It's the paper where you have to prove that you tried to hire a Canadian and could not do so, so instead you want to hire a foreign national. So this is a process that usually takes up to a month at the government level, and this was just blocked up. I know they had lawyers on the case and they were trying to push things forward, but by the time I quit, I still had no news.
Yeah, and that document's pretty common, right? For other countries, you have to try to hire someone from your own country before you're allowed.
Yes.
So Luke, I hear you once beat Disney in a lawsuit.
Oh, yeah.
That is a rare feat.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Okay, so I worked for a company, and we had the rights to, I think I should probably talk about this now, the Tarzan.
I mean, please don't, everyone, don't talk about stuff you're gonna get in trouble for.
No, no,
but
so-
if you think you're clear, I don't know better.
And you all know who owns Tarzan, right? It's not Disney, right? It was one of the first movies Disney ever made where they didn't create something on their own or use public domain. So they got the rights from Edgar Rice Burroughs to do a movie, and they didn't realize that some of the rights were held by other people. And the interesting part is the company I worked for at the time, who held those rights, went bankrupt, which is the only way that allows you to do well against a large company, because when you're in bankruptcy court, the judge knows only one side has money. So they tend to settle things very, very quickly. So Disney had to basically get those rights back from us at a reasonable fee instead of pretending we didn't have them. So it was fun to go into a legal situation. We never made it to courtrooms, didn't have to get that far. And go up against the big juggernaut and be like, well, we own it. And we're just, like, me and an artist, there's a painter, was the other person in the bankruptcy committee. Because we were personally owed money by the company that went bankrupt, so we were the bankruptcy committee.
Oh.
It was weird. But it was fun. It was fun. Yeah, the law does work well if it's clear that there's one side of, to me at least, it worked well when the legal system was set up to know one side doesn't have resources. Because you could have dragged it on forever with the bankruptcy judge. And all bankruptcy judges don't let that happen. They're like, nope, this has got to get solved. It's got to get solved now. Might not be perfect, but it's going to get solved today. We had jobs protected.
So Suzanne, how has being in law school and then being a lawyer, how has that helped you with your game? I know it's about law, but how has that sort of informed how you've been working on it?
I've definitely been a lot more careful with who I send out prototypes to and where I show my game and how early on in the concept phase I start disclosing to just everyone that I have this great idea, which I found to be a really interesting balance to strike because as someone who no one has ever heard of, let's be real, marketing something that you can't talk about is super hard. So I am two people. I'm the lawyer that says, hey, we really can't disclose this art or this concept until we have it better fleshed out so that we have a more claim on the copyright. And then I'm like, but I need to market it so that I can sell copies so that it'll be popular and everyone will love it and then they won't trademark their copyrights anymore.
Yeah, NDAs are a really tough thing, and you're like signing one with yourself.
Yeah.
So, ever know what an NDA is?
And I do literally everything on
Non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
I do literally everything on the game, so the art's mine, the music's mine, the programming is mine, it's all me. So I am all of these pieces put together in one person, and then I know a lot of folks who are making games do everything, but I am also the lawyer on the team, which is very complex. So if anything, it's probably given me multiple personality disorder, but it's working out, I think. I hope.
Does that make you game dev Voltron?
Probably. I'll accept that.
And obviously, it's all about legal concepts and issues. So
Yeah.
obviously, going to law school and actual practice has really helped with that. Is there anything in particular that you can point back to, like, oh, this has been super great, or is it just the whole
Building
the
up
whole thing?
the enemies and knowing what attacks you can use against them, like fair use on a patent troll or against copyright crab, and then there's the right of publicity statute that you can get so close but not too close, because if you get too close, for all of you that have no idea what I am talking about, there's another panel tomorrow night at 6 p.m. that will explain all of these concepts wonderfully. But basically, I used legal concepts in a way where there's physical representations of the rules without me just writing out a textbook and saying, well, here are the rules. They're super boring. Enjoy that.
The
Although
way
I-
you beat the trade dress by being more than 20% different than the other thing.
Oh, please, that percentage rule. There is no percentage rule on everything. I have a friend who's an artist who makes cosplay pieces for a living, which is copyright infringement, and all kinds of issues arise there. And he told me that it's okay because it's 20% different. There is no percent anywhere in the entire world that makes it okay. Please make note of that, tattoo it on the back of your hands. Anyone that's working on anything, there is no percent that makes things okay.
100?
That would be great.
Yeah, okay, 100% is okay. We can go that far.
Yeah. I don't think anything is 100% different from everything, though. Nothing is new.
Chris, I know you wrote an article a year or two ago on gamer privacy issues.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so games are this tool that can just slurp up a lot of information from you without you even knowing about it or even suspecting. And it's not all malicious. You know, there's companies that make games that pull that information out of you so that they can monetize and figure out better ways to, who should we target for money? Who should we target for all sorts of exploitative mechanics? But then also a lot of game developers just want to have data so that they know where people are playing, that they're purely good intentions. They get heat maps for where players are playing, what items they're using, what sorts of, what are they doing in these different situations, and that's great, except when they retain the data, of course, for debugging purposes, for future reference, it's great, but let's say, one of my favorite examples is the NBA 2K games, where if you say a swear, the game will throw a foul. Neat little game mechanic, except what if that game records that data, the developers record it just because, how frequently is this mechanic being used? And now there's some investigations, maybe a criminal investigation that you might be a suspect in, and some people subpoena your records and find, oh, you were particularly aggressive during this time. Or you can even measure things about a person's psychographic metrics and metrics about how they're doing at a given time. If a person overvalues positive utility events, let's say that there's there's a bunch of things you can do in the game. There's risk-reward trade-offs you make all the time, and you go for this thing that's not that great of a reward, but you just go for it anyway. People who are happy and not depressed tend to go for those things more frequently. And if you don't, there's a very high probability that you're being depressed. So again, a simple puzzle game, you can get a measure about whether or not, a likelihood, about whether or not someone is depressed or not. So now, is this a medical device? Is this not a medical device? And even though the game, as far as I'm aware of, there's probably some game companies that are doing this behind the scenes and pulling out some of this data. I'm not aware of any real scary stuff that is being used right now besides for monetization in the game industry. But given the games are recording all this information with different sensory devices and in the power of AI pulling all of this data out, I think this is something we as an industry need to start discussing.
And I'll leave you with one scary thought. I do have to remind the panel. That data can absolutely be sold to other people who sell you things. So certain drug manufacturers, and the data is so good that computers know when you're pregnant before you do often.
Yeah, and even if it's an indie game company where these guys are the purists, they're awesome. They're never going to do any harm to you. Well, let's say that, and they never want to sell out their company. Now somebody sues them for something, whatever, and now they need money and they need to liquidate their company right away. They sell the rights. Now some big conglomerate has it, or even another company that is pretty malicious. For a while, and I don't know if this is still a big thing, but indie game developers who made a game, they sold it, they spent 6 months developing it, and they made $300 in the game. Okay, they're like, I made nothing, and nobody's playing it. So there are companies around the world. I don't think most of them are in the U.S. They'll buy up these games, they'll buy the rights to these games on Google Play. Usually Apple's a bit, because they're more restrictive with their App Store. They'll buy them up and then siphon and put on there all these things that pull all the data out of your phone and do all sorts of malicious things, and then they sell that to other companies and organizations. And if it's a Russian company, there's not a whole lot you can do about it.
So we've gone over some of this, so try not to repeat yourselves. But if there is one or two pieces of advice you really wish you had known about the law and legal things before you started into game developing, what would that be? Go ahead, Chris.
I would say naming. Most of the legal things that we've dealt with have been, I would say, patents and trademarks are the two main things that have fallen in our camp. I could probably talk trademark stories from our company for an hour easily. But that is the single most one that I'm glad that we had a trademark case fall in our lap right away at the naming of the company, and so I learned a whole lot right away, got that all taken care of, and I'm glad, because had I not learned all of that right away, we could have had some problems later on. So when we wanted to trademark hazardous software, and my last name is Hazard, you can't trademark a name, a proper name if it's in the phone book, but hazardous software, looked out there, there's nothing like that. I've been holding onto it for a while, trademarked it. And there was a guy who, we didn't think anything to do with it, wanted to trademark it, and it had a live trademark for a TV show called Play Hazard. And Hazard is a 13th century Arabic dice game, which I don't know what he's planning on doing, but there's a single guy who had this trademark. And so we tried to carve it out around and say that, okay, we'll do everything except for dice games or dice TV games. We have the trademark on games except for that. And the trademark office, the USPTO, tossed us back to us and said, no, this is still too close. And so I ended up arguing, and this is back when we were bootstrapping. I didn't have much money to hire a lawyer. I did all my homework, and granted, in grad school, I learned how to read other people's papers and write like other people and that sort of stuff. So I wrote my first and only legal-sounding thing, citing case law and things like that. If you guys were to read it, I don't know if it passes the muster or not, but it looked right to me.
I'm curious to read it now, actually.
And I argued that given like 3 or 4 different cases, that Hazard, because it's a generic game, shouldn't be allowed to be trademarked. And I actually got that guy's trademark invalidated by the USPTO by that letter that I sent in, and then was able to push hazardous software through without any problem. We just need to carve out that dice game thing. And that we had another company that locally, so we're in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. There's quite a few game companies there. Epic is down there, and there's a kind of a game hubs or a place where there's a lot of game indie game developers in there, and one of the guys started a company called what was it, Hazardous Games or Hazardous Studios or something like that. And because we work in this area, and this is like our neighbors, it's not like somebody around the world. A colleague of mine, Randy Greenback, worked on like Command & Conquer series and bunch of things like that, was actually working right next to them and said, hey, you guys know that there's a Hazardous software right around here. You let me know. And I'm like, well, you've talked to them, right? Like, yeah, okay, whatever. So then I go to the East Coast Game Conference, ECGC, which is local in Raleigh. It's a small, like 1,500 person gaming industry conference. I have lunch with a guy I'd never met before, just, networking at the conference, and he said, oh yeah, I met another one of your developers here. And I'm like, wait, I'm the only person who's attending this conference. And there was a little bit of confusion there. And then later on, I had another colleague of mine say, oh, I didn't know you guys opened up another branch at this other location. And I'm like, we didn't. What are you talking about? Finally, I put all pieces together and realized that no, he hadn't changed the name of and there was that confusion apparently. And so I approached him about it, and it's obvious. I mean, there's when you have that, we had the trademark for like 4 or 5 years, tons of products and things. Everybody knows us. It's an easy win. It's nothing hard. And these are the new guys. They had one game that they just released. They had nothing behind it, no trademarks. And I approached the guy. I said, hey, I know you guys, you're starting a company. I know it's a bit of work. Just please change the name. We'll be nice about it. Just change it. Everything will be fine. No big deal. And he's like, so sue me, and walked away.
Shots fired.
Yes. Thousands of double-digit almost. Thousands of legal dollars later, it was an open and shut case. It was, but the annoying thing for me is that he cost us it was painful for me, painful for us. His company wasn't that far. He could have just changed the name. We've had a couple other companies that did something like that too, with the name Hazardous based on that. And we try to be very friendly about it. I have my lawyer look over it and take before he sends the email. I don't, because you almost always want to do that, because otherwise you'll really screw yourself over. But it's always been easy except for that one case.
If you were here yesterday and heard the talk about likelihood of confusion, that's what we're trying to stop. Oh, you have another branch? No, we didn't. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's the problem.
Actually, does this whole case mean that, so you got the trademark Hazard rejected on the basis that it's too generic, right?
No, Hazardous software.
Oh, okay.
We got it rejected on the basis that there was another company that called Play Hazard for TV dice shows.
Right. Okay. Because I was thinking, this really sounds like you could probably use that case as a reference to invalidate one trademark using an extremely generic term. There's, a tiny hardware company. They make phones and computers. They are called Apple. Just thinking.
Yeah. Well, there's also the I forget what you guys probably know the term, but if it's not widely known, then because this Play Hazard thing was not widely known and it was during a term. I remember reading something about that. I don't know if any of you guys are trademark folks.
I am. I'm not. Generally, if a term is not well known, like I never could have told you Hazard was an Arabic dice game, and that speaks in favor of granting the trademark, because no one's gonna make the connection Hazard for dice games. So that would actually, would make it stronger. I'm not.
Yeah.
Although if you mean no one had heard of Play Hazard and they didn't have any sort of reputation built up, that is, I don't want to say a strike against them, but basically a strike against them, because they don't quite have the reputation built up that the consumer is going to care.
And he also had the trademark for like 2 or 3 years, and there was virtually zero that he did with it.
Yeah. Well, that's another problem. You have to use the trademark, otherwise. Yeah.
But I think if any one of those were not the case, then I probably wouldn't have won that. But
Uphill battle.
yeah.
We can never guarantee anything. I mean, I've had pretty clear-cut cases that have just been nightmares, and I've had kind of bad cases that somehow went through. I'm sure Suzanne could also tell stories like
war
that.
Stories.
the
Lawyers
war
get together
stories.
in like a group, and we just all have a drink and tell our war stories.
But anyway, getting back to this, you might not have much, Suzanne, but anything you wish you had known before you had gotten into your
This
games?
is less something that I wish I had known and more something I wish developers would know.
Okay.
Keep records, write things down, keep old builds, make notes of who did what on what build, who gave art and what they were given in exchange. I hear all the time, I can't afford a lawyer, and it's rarely true, because we should be part of your budget. But if you really, really, really can't, like you literally are eating ramen every night and sleeping in your car, then at least write down who got what, so that if it comes down to you and the artist fighting over whether or not the artist is owed $50,000 for that awesome pumpkin they drew for you, you can be like, no, we have this dated thing from this date, and it's saved in my Google Drive so you can see when I made it. I have every single build I've pushed of my game, so that if someone comes out and says, no, I gave you the idea for that via email on this date, I can be like, well, it was in the build on this date, and I have it saved in my Google Drive. So no, you didn't go away. Records are perhaps the best defense without giving advice, the best thing you can do for yourself to make things easier going forward.
So Max, besides the immigration woes, are there anything you kind of wish you had learned before you got into things?
It's kind of complicated. I'd say, well, the way NDAs work are something that should really be taught to any developer in any subdomain, not just games, because whenever you're working in software of any type, you will always sign NDAs at every single company you work for. And this is super fuzzy, and most of the time I've just gotten by, and trusting that if 100 other people have signed the same contract I'm signing now, it probably is safe, but I'm seeing lawyers cringe as I say that.
Yes, you are, but...
So,
Go. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go. You had anything else to say?
I have an NDA story as
Oh,
well.
sure, go ahead.
I've signed, especially because we do strategy level serious games for a lot of large organizations. That's a very hairy thing. Large organizations are very protective of their strategies.
Yes.
But we, in the games industry, there is one game company. I'm not going to say who it is, but we had a meeting with them, and in order to see these certain things they wanted to show us and to discuss some things, they wanted an NDA. And we get there, the lady at the front desk was said, oh, here's the NDAs, and I was with another professor from George Mason. We're meeting about some project we're going to collaborate on, and we both read these, and we're like, we're not signing these. Both of us found like 3 or 4 things in the NDA that are like, holy cow, no, just here's it back. We're not going to have this meeting. This is scary bad. And the lady looked at us perplexed and said, well, we've been using the same NDA for 15 years, and no one else has ever complained. And I think they finally went back and they talked to their lawyer and changed it. But there's a lot of things that you should look for, and you can go read online for things that are important to have in there that are not important. And there's some things that sound like you really want in there that you really don't, like lifetime of the NDA. You think, well, you should never tell anybody this. Well, that's actually a problem. Lawyers can fill you in a lot more details as to why that's a problem. But things like that you should really look out for.
I would point out, last year at the Chicago Video Game Law Summit that Suzanne and Ross up here organized, wonderful. If you're going to be in Chicago in a couple months, come and be in Chicago. That exact same issue was talked about. We had a game developer panel, and people said, yeah, there was just so awful garbage in these contracts. I'm not signing this. I mean, that happens a lot. So I think one takeaway, if you're going to sign something, read it first.
Please.
And also understand what's in it.
Oh, and understand terms.
Yeah.
Best effort. Time is of the essence. Things that sound
Industry
benign
standard.
Are those
not.
things legal? Do they have any meaning? I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
Very
Industry
specifically.
standard, best effort. They are all loaded terms. So watch for things that sound perfectly benign. They're dangerous.
They're usually the worst.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other fun stories anyone would like to tell
Can't.
that you are allowed to relate?
Sorry.
Get a good lawyer. I found our lawyers, or our general counsel, via another guy who started a very successful game company, sold it off to a major corporation, and this lawyer came highly recommended. He had both 15 years in the games industry, 15 years in defense. Was was an entrepreneur beforehand. Was a physics major in undergrad, and his prices were phenomenally reasonable for someone of his caliber. He's also like a major partner in a maritime law firm before. He's got this resume that's like this thick. But he gave us a break because we're a small company, and he thought that these guys might make it something big in the future. I'm sure he'd want it in if we ever did an M&A or merger and acquisition or something, some exit event like that. I'm sure he'd want in. But sometimes you can get lawyers to get you. Sometimes you can get better deals.
So bouncing off of that, I pointed at myself when he said find a good lawyer, but I want to preface that with your lawyer should be someone that you like enough to talk to, because we can't do you any good unless you tell us what's going on. I don't want to call at 2 a.m. where you scream into the phone, everything's on fire. It's terrible. It's much better if you can, before you do the thing, be like, hey, I'm doing this thing, and then I'm like, don't do the thing, and then you don't do the thing, and everything's wonderful, and I bill you for an hour instead of for the 20 hours it takes me to undo the thing you did. So find someone that you wouldn't mind having coffee with or calling on the afternoon and you aren't afraid of, because as horrifying as we aren't that horrifying. And there's a right lawyer for everyone. There's different personalities. There's Mark, there's Ross, there's Sam, there's me. We're all very different people, and we mesh with different folks and talk to us, figure out who you like, what you like about them, and all that.
And I'll add to that, treat your lawyer nice, and here's why. If you tell
Please.
Do it.
There's good reasons for this. If you pay your lawyer on time and then something bad happens and you're like, oh my gosh, like we're going bankrupt, something really bad is going to happen, and there's another lawyer who wants a massive retainer, it's more likely, you never know, but it's more likely that your lawyer will say, hey, these guys are good, it's fine. They'll ask for a lower retainer if the situation's okay. Like, you can get little favors like that sometimes. Again, depends on your situation. Another reason is, let's say that you have the things that it doesn't matter. I just need this done in the next 2 months. Who cares? Or the next 6 months, that doesn't matter. Versus those things that you have a contract and this is a huge moment for your company and you need to turn it around in 3 days or 2 days. There was one time I had a 90-page contract dumped on me on Monday. In order for us to win it, we had to get it turned around by Friday. So if you don't need it right away, tell your lawyer, I don't need it right away, so that those few times that you do need those things, you can call those favors.
No, I like everything you said there.
Yeah.
How about you, Max? Any fun stories that you're allowed to talk about?
Not that many, actually, because I'm NDA bound on a lot of things.
I believe that.
Actually, there might be one thing related to the way NDAs work and all that.
Okay.
If you're working for a big, large software company, you will have to sign NDAs, as I said earlier. Be extra careful to actually follow the rules of that NDA. It's not something you sign and then forget about, because, if you break it and it somehow turns out badly, it's gonna hurt you because you're liable for things. Sometimes you could just get fired, but you might also hurt your company. All those, accidental leaks and all that. I know that stuff like. So I don't know if the story is true, because I wasn't at the company yet. But Assassin's Creed Black Flag, right? The one with the pirates. This game was leaked. The existence. It found itself on video game news websites and all that. Not because people sold it to journalists or anything, well, not developers I mean, but just because people were just randomly chatting at a restaurant outside of work, and it turned out the dude right next to them was a games journalist. Be extra careful.
Okay. And one more question here, and then I think we can open it up, and if anyone else has questions, we could take from the audience. But what do you, in your opinion, what would make for a good lawyer? What kind of things would you look for? And we'll skip over Suzanne for initially.
For obvious reasons.
Chris, so you have a lawyer. What do you? All right, great. Sure, but what do you look for in a lawyer? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, the number one thing is make sure your lawyer is the type of lawyer that you need for what needs to be done, and your lawyer knows that his or her limitations. So, like, our general counsel knows, like, these are the areas I'm best in, and then these are some areas where he can do it, but he highly recommends, and here's some people to use. Every once in a while, you have to pay for one of those really ultra high-priced lawyers for 3 hours of their time, because there's only 6 of them in the state that your company's incorporated in, and there's only 6 of them that specialize in that particular area to make sure your company is safeguarded for something. And those times, it's worthwhile spending the grand for that hour or whatever. But a good lawyer should be able to help you navigate those sort of things and point you to what you need and don't. I also agree with making sure that you have a great conversation with your lawyer, that he understands your needs. You don't want somebody who's a friend of a friend lawyer who knows very little about your industry or the types of problems you're working on, or even the state your company's incorporated. If they don't know that, They can give you legal advice, but
Yeah.
yeah. And then experience too, and just philosophy. Because some lawyers, there's especially people who've been corporate lawyers, especially they decide to go on their own, or people who just more of the corporate mindset. There's a guy I know says, yeah, his job is basically someone calls him up asking him, can I do something? And he says no, and he shuts the phone down, and that's his
That's not
entire
just
job.
lawyers.
And that is. Technically, it's right in some degree, but that's like too careful. As a business person, you have to navigate that and say, the lawyer recommends this. What is the acceptable business risk? Because everything that you do can be construed as something. They can be taken the wrong way. You can be sued. I mean, you could be sued for waving to somebody high if they want to. Will it win? Probably not. Almost never. But the business person has to navigate the risk. If the lawyer has a bit of a business mind, has ever been in a startup, has ever been in a role other than a lawyer advisor, a counsel, that can be very helpful because then you can understand your situation and say, legally, I recommend you do this. Here's some other things to do to consider with the business. If you do this, this might be a likely outcome. This might not be, as opposed to just saying, no, don't do it.
I would think personally, at least 25% of my legal advice, and probably more than that, is not so much knowing the law, but knowing the industry, and knowing, well, this is how things tend to work, and not knowing that can radically change what the advice might look like. You might not have had to get many lawyers, Max, but
No, not yet.
if you had to,
Yeah, well,
what are you looking for?
Okay, if I had to, actually, Susan raised an excellent point with her previous intervention, which is find a lawyer that you would feel comfortable talking to, because, okay, you guys are going to hate me for this, but TV gives you guys a terrible, terrible reputation.
No.
I mean, if
Objection.
yeah, like TV shows really make lawyers out to be those soulless corporate monsters whose only purpose is to make your life a living hell. This is not true. Like, I mean, you've seen these guys. They're actually cool. But
I wouldn't go that far,
But
but
really, the very word lawyer is kind of scary to the layman, you know.
Say attorney. It sounds better.
Yeah. Also, what I would look for in a lawyer is a good dramatic way of saying objection.
all right. Just point out that is not actually how law works. I'm also disappointed, but
Objection.
all right, Suzanne, what do you got?
So I'm going to throw in a plug here, and you all can ignore it if you want. I assist the board of an organization called the Video Game Bar Association. It's a group of attorneys who have experience in video game law, and they have pretty high standards for what that means. But a certain percentage of your clients have to be video game related, so publishers, developers, artists, musicians. You have to have a certain number of years of experience. We all get together and talk about the issues specific to this society or to this industry. So it's really helpful to get someone who's actually in the industry, because tech lawyers are great, they're wonderful people, and the general practitioner in a small hodunk town is probably like the best dude there because he's a lawyer and we're all the best dudes anywhere. Not biased. But finding someone that actually works in games and has worked with game clients before so that you don't have to explain what Unity is or who owns Game Maker is really, really helpful, and it saves you a lot of time, it saves them a lot of time, it makes everything run a lot more smoothly.
All right. Thank you. It's been great. Does anyone else have questions you'd like to ask about?
Yes.
All right, Mark, go ahead. One of our panels from yesterday. Okay.
Oh yes, that actually happened to people I know. Yes.
Is that a story we need to tell, or?
Yeah. I actually. I do. Yeah.
I've actually never signed a non-compete. I think unless I was super pressed for financially, I don't think I ever would. It's something in my company. I would rather run a company that I want people to work for me rather than to like I can't escape. And so I don't think. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine a scenario where I would ever advocate or put one of those into an employment agreement that I would have.
It's a trap.
Yeah.
All right. Our other lawyer panel.
I don't think that we're going to cover this in our panel tomorrow night, so I'd love to know game dev experiences. Just if you talk a little bit about your own experiences with being the contractor at times and being an employee at times. How does that seem to you?
Employee versus independent contractor. That's easy, right?
Always been an employee. Next.
I actually have one slide on this tomorrow night, just the one though, so next.
It's complicated. As somebody who brings on employees versus contractors, it's a tough battle sometimes because sometimes depending on the systems that we use, like one of our clients for things we develop for them, they want us to use their systems, but then it's like we're prescribing them. So if we have a contractor, there's got to be that sort of more of an arm's length relationship there, so that you can't say, contractor, come here, work at this facility, use all of our equipment, we're going to give you everything. Well, then they're probably an employee. And there's a lot of tax implications around them that can come around and bite you pretty bad later, especially with like all the healthcare stuff. That's a whole nightmare in and of itself. Like for some of we've had one or two, couple contractors that we've brought on as employees where we said, okay, you've done great work for us. We want to bring you on as an employee because the role that we have for you is stable enough. It makes sense. Let's switch you over. And but sometimes you just need temporary work. Like let's say that we've got a big project, we need to ramp up a whole lot of our production, more than what we have in house. But we know that we're only going to need 6 months of this work, or 2 months of this work, or even sometimes like 3 weeks of that. So you definitely want to do a contractor for that. As myself, I've largely been I've kind of done a little bit of largely an employee, but even like I do a bit of public speaking as well. When I get paid for one of those, it's always weird. Are you contracting my company to hire me to come there, or are you contracting me directly as an independent contractor? Because that's a kind of different thing, and it's weird to navigate depending on the relationship you have with them and how relevant the company is. But it's very nuanced. I don't know if I can give any particular advice on that.
Well, I'd like to touch on that a little bit more. What have you all had to deal with, if anything, between the distinction between you as a person and the company that you work for? What kind of issues have you encountered with that? Because I see so many horrible problems my clients don't realize have dug themselves into, and so anything you could say about that would probably be good. Or not.
All right. It helps being the majority shareholder of my company. We have an S corp, so that adds a layer of padding in some degrees. But there are, like I said, there's sometimes it gets kind of complicated. Like in my speaking, like let's say I'm giving a keynote at a International Association of Privacy Practitioners up in DC in 2 months, and they're paying me, they're paying me for the speaking to go up there and do that. But our company, we do serious games, we do kind of AI related and business processes, and we're kind of getting to privacy. We're not really doing a lot of work in there. It's just sort of a research and interest area that kind of relates to some of the things we do. So is that me? Because it's more of a research area for my PhD versus something that my company does. And so, for example, that one is, that's going as me, but other relationship will be as my company. So it just depends. And even for example, some of the contracts that we do with other organizations, we do some contract work sometimes. Make a serious game for us that does this for our organization, and so our employees are contractors. But then, actually, even with that, some people that I deal with have a similar problem. Some of our subcontractors, are incorporated, and so you bill to them and use the federal tax ID versus their social security number. But then those have to be managed a little differently too.
Any question from someone who's not a lawyer or talking tomorrow? Yes, up front there. that's really getting more into legal nitty-gritty and
Yeah,
advice.
that's a tomorrow thing.
That's a tomorrow.
I'm a
thing.
game
Come back
developer
tomorrow.
today, but
I mean, the short answer is maybe, depending on where you live and what the law is.
yeah.
I mean, that's really the best we can say
They can be
about
they
that.
can be really mean though, the non-competes that they can put out there, because I mean it comes with a legitimate goal. I don't want you to come to my company, learn all of the things about it, and then run off and start your own company and put me out of business, because that wouldn't be fair. But some companies decide to take that really laudable goal and use it to just shut down any competition, which is the opposite side and equally not fair. So it's a balancing act on the part of the legislators, the lawyers, and the companies that doesn't always come out well for the employees.
I would just say, whenever you sign something, assume it means exactly what it says. I mean, there are some ways to get around things. There's obviously, lawyers are known for getting out of contracts. I mean, not to the extent that actually happens on like TV, but I mean, there are ways around things. But go into it assuming it means exactly what it says and you're stuck with it. I think that's a fair place to put it.
The reverse of that is, even if somebody says, we would never actually do that, do not believe that.
They could be lying. Also, the people who own the company 2 months from now might not be those people. So be very careful. Anybody else? Questions? Way in the back. Opinion on terms of service. Have you had to deal with terms of service?
Of course, yeah. It's sitting on the other side. I haven't had to deal with it in a couple of years, so we've kept the same one for that amount of time. So I'm trying to think back to that. I tend to be very privacy-minded, and I try to be nice to our customers as much as possible. And so ours is pretty, we collect as little as possible. That's more of a privacy policy. But we try to have more of a minimal approach where we're not being too demanding, but at the same time still protecting ourselves. So, for example, somebody posts some pirated things, some illegal things, and we have remedies for that, I believe. Anyway, my lawyer looked through all of that, and it's been a long time ago. But I think it also depends on what type of service you're offering too. Like if you're offering and where you sit in the games industry, if you're making a game of a certain type and you release it over like the Google Play Store or in iOS, that's one thing. Versus if you're making a game that other people can tap into, or let's say you're making a middleware service for other. You're making a game and you're making some engine out of it that you're going to expose to other developers and sell that. Or sell something over the Unity store, especially if maybe it talks to the cloud, maybe it does some other analytics. You have to take all those into consideration when you come with the terms of service, because you might have different customers that require different terms of service. You might have one for the end customer, a different one for the products that you sell to different organizations, to different game developers, and the different uses as well.
On a maybe slightly, I'd say more technical point of view, the fact is that more and more games being developed these days are services. The days where every game was entirely self-contained, enclosed on one physical device, be it cartridge or CD or hard drive or whatever, and was always played strictly offline on a device that never talked to anything, are pretty much over. Almost every game has some kind of online components, be it multiplayer, stats, even cloud saves. So in a sense, if you're, on PC, if you're buying a game on Steam, you are in fact using a service. So terms of service are necessary, because if they're not here, the whole idea of we're making a game and letting you play it becomes a huge legal gray area, right? Correct me if I'm saying stupid things.
No,
You guys
you're
really
fine.
know.
A question for the lawyers, and this is something I haven't thought about really until now, is we have downloadable products, so that we have end-user license agreements as well as the terms of service. But if you have something that's very much online, where is that distinction where you only need a terms of service and you don't need an end-user license agreement? Does that exist?
I found it to be a titling issue more than anything.
Yeah,
You
I
can
would
roll
say
most of the things back into your
into it.
terms of service and still have
Yeah.
end user licensee stuff in there and
Right.
be
And just kind of make a hybrid?
yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it's really more what we're calling it versus
Yeah.
what all
The concept.
there is
I
within
guess
it.
Having been around for a little while, I tend to think of like these sort of things go in an end-user license agreement, these things go in a terms of service, but I can see that they
Yeah.
kind of converge.
Yeah.
It probably also has links to software licenses. when it comes to, whenever you're using, for example, free software, most of them will come with a license, be it MIT, BSD, GPL, or whatever, which all have one very important thing in common. These licenses plainly state the software is provided as is. If something bad happens to you, it's not our fault.
Yeah, that's pretty standard.
Yeah, for a good reason.
That's another thing. I know everyone always just blindly clicks through, EULA, terms of service, whatever. Okay, yeah, I read it, but it never reads it. And I do the same thing. I'll be honest. I can't be bothered to every time I want to install, a software update to read 10 pages of text. But I mean, there's important stuff in there, and you should still read them, even though I don't expect you to.
A recommendation from practical perspective. Now, if you want to be super pedantic, every end-user license agreement on your computer, you can send that off to your lawyer and say, "Does this fit?" And you'll rack up legal bills really fast.
I mean, I'm okay with that, but
Yeah, they're okay with that. However, from a business perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So if it's something that everybody uses, maybe it's like Visual Studio or Unity, you're just read it yourself, you're probably fine. But if it's an esoteric library made by a small company that you're building your entire game around and you need that, then you should send that to your lawyer.
Yep.
Total aside, developers have done some really interesting things with terms of service and end-user licensing agreements. One developer put a phone number in, and whoever called the phone number first won a prize pack of swag about the game. It took 6 months for anyone to call the number. Another developer, it was actually in the news, put that he owns your firstborn if you click agree, so he apparently owns the firstborn of anyone that plays his game. Another developer said that if you showed up at your house, you had to provide him with a size large men's button-down shirt at any given time. So they're not all awful. There's the Amazon lumber.
I was going to say lumber. Yeah, go ahead.
Just said that in the case of a zombie apocalypse, you can use their software to upkeep medical devices or life-saving systems. So there's fun stuff in there. It's not all terrible, and not that you should read every single one because some of them are pretty dry, but
I mean, that is one of the more fun aspects of the job. If I can just throw something wacky in, it's fun. Go ahead, Max.
As I recall, IBM is the only company that's officially allowed to use JSON, the serialization format, for evil. Because the license to that specifically says you're not allowed to use this for evil. It's obviously a joking term, but it turns out IBM lawyers don't have that much of a sense of humor. So they contacted the guys to make sure that everything was clear, and they are now allowed to use JSON for evil. Make of that what you may.
Did you in the back there had something?
Oh crap! I might be in trouble there.
There goes my evening plans. What else is going on tonight?
Something else, Mark? Huh?
That reminds me, what are your experiences been with using open source software, especially integrating into these commercial or hopefully commercial products?
Yeah, from our perspective, the GPL, it can be very dangerous. You got to be very careful with that. Make sure that if you're using it, make sure you're dynamically linking it and it's okay, and double, triple, quadruple check everything. If you're using GPL, that you might want to run by your lawyer. MIT and BSD licenses and the like are generally a little bit better.
LGPL too.
Yeah, LGPL too. Yeah, actually, LGPL is make sure you're dynamically linked. GPL, make sure you know what you're doing before you use that. Just think it through, talk it through with your lawyer before you even think about that. Especially the GPL 2 versus 3. There's a big difference in terms of your offering services, with patents and all that kind of stuff, depending on your company's philosophy.
Be extra careful of 3.
What was that?
Be extra careful of GPL 3.
Yeah. So I don't think, I don't know, August, I don't think we use any GPL stuff. Yeah, I can't think of anything. We do use a couple LGPL libraries, and even then, it's a risk whenever you take that on, especially.
For those who don't know GPL, LGPL, there may be a home audience for this at some point. They're recording. So, what is that?
Yeah, it's the GNU public license. Did I get that right?
Yep.
And they call it copyleft, which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, saying that Anyone can use this for any purpose under the following restrictions, namely, if you give this code and if you use this and you distribute to other people, you have to distribute all the source code that touches it
Yeah.
for at most a very nominal fee.
Yeah.
So you can technically charge $1 or $2 or whatever the cost of printing the CD is, but you also need to include that and the CD, which is very problematic if you want to maintain your source. If you have some proprietary trade secrets. Yes, there's one company that I'm friends with the CEO of who because of the area that they're in, it's unlikely that a patent would do anything. They have super cutting edge technology, and he said they're talking to their lawyer. The only way they can protect what they have so that someone else doesn't steal it. They've spent years working on this. Is to keep the source closed. Otherwise, they'll be out of business tomorrow. And it's one of those things where many things it takes a lot of thought, but once you have it laid out, sure, maybe it's like 5,000 lines of code, a real simple idea, and in those cases, you can't use GPL at all because then your idea will be out there.
Yeah.
Even with MIT and BSD and the ones that you can use freely, which you compile in, all you need to do is copy and paste that text and stick it in a big file with your README. The issue with those is sometimes you don't know where that code necessarily came from. What if somebody copied and pasted some GPL code in there or copied and pasted some proprietary code? You're not so sure. So our policy for that is to really kind of vet those and only use them if we need them. So some companies, if you're doing web services and everything is online, you're not distributing anything, you can get away with a little bit more because you're holding the code yourself. But if other people are downloading your code, there's a big risk whenever you do that. So be very careful about what you include in distributed binaries. And that includes for phone apps as well.
Yes.
Now the asset store. The asset store.
Yeah, the asset store.
Okay, yeah.
Have you guys come across anything that someone said, oh, you used our stuff and you have to give us credit, or you used our stuff and you can't distribute it for some reason because it's an asset store, or I can't remember how the asset store works because it's been a while. But I didn't know if anyone had said anything problem with that. The closest thing I've seen is people who will put things up in the asset store that they actually didn't make. So you'll have the person that originally made it saying, hey, I made that, and you'll say, no, I bought it in the asset store, it's all legit, and it's not. And not knowing isn't a very good defense. So it's better to just go with no, or thoroughly vetting it. There's all kinds of contractual things lawyers can do, but I'm a dev today, so trying not to be too lawyery.
Go ahead.
I'm wary of things from asset stores or that I pick up offline for free because I don't know the actual source.
If you get.
And with that, there was one, I'm not going to say specifics, there's one software asset that we were thinking about using, and not for, I'm not going to say what it is at all, but we're like, oh, this seems like it solves our problems pretty well. It's free, open source, and all these sorts of things. And I started reading about it and researching who's behind this. And there's a lot of people suspicious that the organization behind this code, even though it's free and open source, that they might be siphoning data off of you if you use it. And it's hosted in a country that has different laws than us. So I don't want to use that because there's a large risk associated with that. Now, if anyone is curious enough, maybe if you've taken a little bit of programming and maybe 1 or 2 semesters of programming in college, something like that, check out the Underhanded C competition. The Underhanded C competition is you write C code, and every year they skipped a couple of years. They hold it. You have to write code that does something, some command line utility for Linux or something like that. It does something, and the code has to look totally benign, like something a developer would have naturally written. However, it has to do something very malicious. And you get bonus points if you can explain it as, oh, it was an off by 1 error. It was a simple, I was tired. It's a simple mistake. You can't have do evil evil routine in here. It has to be able to pass an inspection by somebody. And if they have it in 1,000 lines of code, and some of those things they hide amazing things where like they get a rootkit into your or an SSH. They can get all the data off of your user account from running this little application that does nothing more than convert a picture to a different size. and you think they can do that in 1,000 lines of code. Now look at a software package that you're pulling that might have 100,000 or 1,000,000 lines of code. What's in there? You have no idea.
Did you want to add anything on your hand and see competition, Max?
Not necessarily about the underhanded C competition, but yes, look it up, and also try to read a paper called Trusting Trust. I don't remember the name of the author, but it's
Ken Thompson.
Ken Thompson. Yes, that's the one. This explains one of this thing will turn you paranoid.
Yes.
Because it's about the axiom that at some point you have to assume that something somewhere is not malicious in your software and hardware suite. And if somebody is devious enough, they can write, for example, a C compiler that detects when it's compiling, let's say, a login manager, and silently inserts a secret extra password that gives someone who knows it unrestricted access to your computer. And it can also detect when it's compiling a compiler. And when it does that, it inserts in the compiler code that detects when the compiler is compiling a login manager, and will insert the second layer of untrustworthiness. And at this point, the only thing you can do is just unplug your computer, burn it, and go cry in a corner. Trusting Trust, Ken Thompson. Read it. It's awesome.
Yeah. Seriously.
And then never sleep again.
Yeah, that too. That's from the 1980s, by the way. It's
Yes.
old.
Anybody else? Any questions? I just have one more thing, Max. For you, I know you work at a decently sized company. Do you ever have any real interaction with the legal department in your day-to-day activities, or even,
Well,
odd day off?
No, actually, the good thing about working in mostly programming and backend stuff is that most of what you do never technically sees the light of the day. Everything runs on your servers. It's very rarely directly facing the consumer. So you don't have to deal with stuff like intellectual property, assets, stuff like, I'm fairly sure our artists and sound guys deal with legal way more often, because they have to design weapons that are based on existing brands, model cars that are obviously based on existing models, because games tend to be realistic. They may have to use the likenesses of people, get artists to work on soundtracks and all that. It's hard.
All right. If there are no more questions, and seeing none, thank you, all of you. It's been really great.
Thank you, guys. Also, thank you, Sam, for having us.
My pleasure. 6 o'clock tomorrow. We'll be right back here for the final day of our hopefully first annual MAGES Legal. Suzanne will be back, as will Ross up here in the front row. You've heard from him in the questions section every day. And please come back. We have some great presentations, including the Wonder Twins. Yes. I'm not kidding.
So good.
So we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.